Hi, I am Lucky Ladybug, and so last night I finally finished that story I was writing that I talked about in the last video, the one that is the culmination of Genesis's arc, and wow, it ended up dark, didn't it? Like, I already knew some of what was going to happen, but then some other twists came up that I hadn't originally going to plan to do, but then did because I thought they'd be interesting. But yeah, that was a wild ride, wasn't it? So if anybody has been reading the story or wants to read it, yeah, there'll be some spoilers in the video, and also some information about stories all throughout the my timeline, kind of. So I found when I wrote the story, this hadn't been the plan either exactly, but I discovered that it not only kind of culminated in Genesis's arc, but in my my OC villains that I've had ever since I started writing for FF7. And I realize since they're OCs, people probably mostly don't care about them. I understand fully because I'm in it for the canon characters, but I do know that there are a few people that like those OC characters I created, which makes me happy because while usually I'm not that interested in OCs and I only create them as like supporting characters to move a plot along, I actually did get pretty fond of those FF7 villains I created. So I mean, yeah, they were there from the beginning. Like the first or second story I ever wrote for Final Fantasy VII was a Sephiroth and Zack adventure where they go to this little dinky town that was originally going to be Coral because it had like the gold saucer and everything, but then I realized it didn't seem like my ideas were going to fit with what was going on in Coral in canon at the time, so I had to change it to something I made up. But then that looked silly because you could tell it was supposed to be Coral, because why would there be two towns with an amusement park saucer above them, But so Seth and Zack go to this town to investigate some problems. They discover that the mayor is completely anti-Shinra and he's an extremist, and eventually he's willing to blow up the whole town just trying to get rid of Sephiroth and Zack. And this mayor was Dalton, and his right-hand man is named Rakish. He's the prison guard, and there's this whole big plot where they frame Zack for murder, and Seth has to rescue him, and it was exciting. Eventually, Seth gets into this fight with Rakish, and the whole story was inspired because in Advent Children, if you've noticed, Sephiroth has this mysterious scar on his collarbone. It's very strange. There's no explanation for it anywhere. And I crafted this whole story because I wanted to have a reason why that happened. I was curious what could have caused that. So it ended up happening in this fight with Rakish. He wounds Sephiroth in the collarbone. Seth defeats him, and then Rakish decides he's going to jump to his death instead of being taken prisoner by the Shinra dogs. So then I did a sequel to the story. The first one was called Just a Simple Mission. Of course, it was anything but simple. And the sequel was another simple mission, tried to tie up all the loose ends from the first one. And I ended up creating a twin brother for Rakish. And at that point, I decided Rakish is the last name. And so I gave them first names at that point. The prison guard became Gunju. It's an African name that means wildcat. Seemed to fit his insanely crazy, sadistic personality. Azazel was his twin. It's a Hebrew word, usually translated as scapegoat. I don't know for sure if the original Azazel mentioned in the scriptures is supposed to be meaning scapegoat. That I've read that it's not. It's supposed to be like an evil spirit named Azazel. I don't know. But so I used the name based on the scapegoat meaning. It fit kind of some of what was going on in the story. Because I like to, when possible, if I have an important OC, I like to give them a name that has some kind of meaning, like for their personality or for their role in the story. So I picked their names very much on purpose. And Azazel eventually gets into this fight with Seth and Zach. He's not as crazy as his brother, but he does end up kind of going into a bout of temporary insanity and causes an avalanche. And Sephiroth cuts off his right hand when he's trying to shoot at them. And you don't know then for a while if he even made it out of this mess alive. And we don't hear from him again. Dalton was taken prisoner at the end of Just a Simple Mission. He's alive. And then fast forward to my stories where they're on Earth. Dalton is still around there, and he's just as crazy about the Promised Land that was his and the Rakish's obsession in the early stories. They were looking for the Ancient's compass. And when they first turn up on Earth, they're looking for the Ancient's amethyst. And we find Azazel did survive, and he has a prosthetic right hand that's very technologically advanced, like the Star Wars hands. It can move all around, and he can feel things with it. So his brother is dead. His brother stays dead. He's a very, very mischievous ghost and causes a lot of trouble for everybody. Sometimes even his brother gets frustrated with him because he can't do anything to control him. And so that was the start of their adventures with these characters in the present day, on Earth. Most of the stories with them are in my Twilight and Dawnverse. And so they've caused a lot of problems for Sephiroth and company trying to find the Promised Land. And Genesis ended up, I think I talked about this kind of in the other video, that Genesis is kind of trying to watch over Seth and company by keeping an eye out for Dalton, trying to stop Dalton from doing his terrible things. Dalton finds Genesis interesting. He likes to talk to Genesis. He likes Genesis's literary background and his interest in Loveless. And also he likes that Genesis and Sephiroth have had problems. He finds Genesis fascinating. So that's important for later. And so they go through all these different crazy adventures. But like when I started writing this big mystery story, The Diamond Rose Glass, Seth and company end up having to team up with Dalton and the Rakishes because both of their companies are in trouble. And I think that was the first time I started kind of playing around with this idea that, you know, maybe there's a little more to the characters. Maybe they could work together with the good guys if they had to. Azazel is the most logical one and the one most willing to try that. And Dalton has amnesia for the majority of that story because he fell over a waterfall with Zach in a previous story and was missing. And Zach was also missing, and Azazel kidnapped him, let everybody think he was dead for a few days, and then Genesis helped him escape as soon as he was well enough that he could get up and move. So then Dalton isn't discovered until the Diamond Rose Glass. He's got amnesia, but he's still willing to listen to what Azazel says and work with him and Gunju and team up with Seth when they have to. And Dalton gets his memories back in the climax when Azazel is shot at. Actually, Azazel's trying to save Dalton, and then he gets shot. And it wasn't serious. Like I described in the other video, I was gonna make it a bigger thing, and I decided I didn't want to give them quite that much screen time, be a full-blown, huge hurt comfort scene. So it wasn't a serious injury in the Diamond Rose Glass, but it was startling enough. It did bring Dalton's memories back. And they part on good terms because I just hate when a team-up ends with the bad guys turning against the good guys. Once they get what they want, I hate that. It feels so pointless. Why did they team up then? Why did we get that story and have it be so fun and cool and then just have a backstabbing at the end? It's so dumb. But so I have them part on fairly amiable terms, and they know that they're going to be villains to contend with again in the future. Seth knows that that's going to happen, that they're not always going to be able to work with them. But so they part well in that story. And then Dalton goes back to being obsessed with the Promised Land. And then that culminates in eventually last year when I wrote Paradise Found, where he does actually find the Promised Land. It's a real physical place. And he and the others are trying to get there, and Seth and the others are trying to stop them, of course. And when the portal is opening to the Promised Land, Yazoo tries to shoot the objects that are causing it to open. The bullet ricochets instead, because the objects can't be destroyed so easily. And the bullet ends up hitting Azazel. And so that time it is serious. Azazel almost dies. And so for the second time in the stories, we finally see Dalton show some humanity. He's worried about Azazel. And Gunju brings him the helmet from this possessed armor set. And the helmet can draw all the other pieces to it. So he puts that on, calls the other armor to him, and then is able to use the shield, which has healing properties, to heal Azazel. And then Dalton fights with Seth, and he's possessed by this armor and acting very strange. He's possessed by the evil spirit of the dark ancient that created the armor. And Azazel immediately sees that something's very wrong, and he steps down. He's sick of this whole obsession by this point. He was more into it at first in like the Gaia stories, or he seemed to be. And over time, he's just gotten so worn down. He's sick of the pointless fighting, and he realizes that Sephiroth didn't have to be their enemy. He doesn't hate Sephiroth like Dalton and Gunju do. And he mostly hated Shinra because he wanted to take over Gaia himself. So he wanted Shinra out of the way. Dalton and Gunju were like anti-Shinra extremists, which isn't inherently bad. You know, the Avalanche was the same. And Dalton often brings that up. He's like, how can you judge me when you committed such horrible sins yourself? Like blowing up the Mako reactors that caused innocent people to die. And so that's an interesting point that he brings up, because, you know, he's really got a point there. Avalanche did really bad things too. But Dalton and the Ragishes are supposed to be antagonists, because while they started out wanting to save the planet or whatever, they kind of got caught up in wealth and power. Dalton is fascinated by the Promised Land, thinking any wishes will be granted there. And so Azazel's just fed up with Dalton's obsessions, and he's worried because he sees that Dalton's been possessed, and he asks Sephiroth and the others to help save Dalton, and promises if they do that he'll let them go and not hurt them. And now they've got to stop Dalton anyway, because they agree that they'll try not to kill him. But Dalton ends up killing Sephiroth with the sword in the set. It's supposed to kill the pure in heart, and Sephiroth says it would never work on him because he just feels he's irredeemable after what he did in his insanity. But the sword does kill him, and then they can't find the shield, hoping to save his life, because Gunju's run off with it. And the armor overtaxes Dalton. He collapses and falls into a magical coma. And Azazel's really angry that Gunju took the shield, because he intended to let them have it and help Sephiroth and then leave as he promised. So Azazel goes to get the shield back, and Gunju have this falling out over it. And Gunju realizes just how much Azazel's changed all these years. And Azazel takes the shield to Aerith and apologizes for Gunju taking it, says that he wouldn't have let that happen. If he'd been able to stop it, he would have let them have it and just go like he promised. But so Cloud is able to drag Sephiroth back from the afterlife, and then they use the shield on him to heal his wounds. And Dalton's in this magical coma, and Azazel can't use the shield on him now because it was old and falling apart, and that was the last time it could do anything. It crumbles then after it heals Seph. So Azazel wonders later then if he really should have given it back, because that was the only way he could see to save Dalton, and yet he doesn't know that it would have worked because the armor was what caused Dalton to fall into this coma in the first place. So for the past year, he's been trying to find a way to save him. And other plot lines happen, like he unearths that Rufus Shinra is Sung's silent partner in a company they've formed on Earth. And nobody knows what's up with Rufus, if he's still their enemy, or if he's legit like he claims. And I don't know myself what to do with him because, you know, he keeps lying to people. And I don't know if he's really trying to redeem himself or not. So I don't know what to do with that plot line, because I don't know what canon has in mind with Rufus. So anyway, so Azazel decides not to work with those guys because he realizes Rufus is still interested in the Promised Land, and he doesn't want to betray Dalton's dream to Shinra. And so he spends the rest of this time just trying to find a solution. Finally, in this story that I just finished, it involves him finding a solution. He hopes this augmented reality technology is supposed to allow him to communicate with Dalton's spirit. So, but he's worried about it because it's risky. And then Gunju decides he's going to take over. He's going to insist on hooking it all up. He's a ghost, but he can do poltergeist things. So he like kicks Azazel out of the room and hooks up all this stuff. And then it causes a lot of trouble because somebody put dark magic into the tech. So when he turns it on, it doesn't just do what it's supposed to, which is to project Dalton's dreams into reality and let you communicate with him. It actually makes his dreams real, turns everything into this horrible nightmare world. And eventually it ends up that Seph and Genesis have to fight Dalton, and the dream version of Dalton. And this dream Dalton is choking Azazel to death and is trying to stab Sephiroth again. And Genesis decides he can't let that happen. And so he comes and gets in the way, because he can't do anything else. He can't like hit the sword with his sword because it's happening too fast. Dalton's already knocked their swords away, so Genesis has to leap and take the blow for Sephiroth. And the shock of that causes Dalton to wake up, and he then takes the machine, disconnects all the wires and everything, stops the simulation, and stops his dream self from choking Azazel, but he can't save Genesis because he's already been stabbed, and this dark magic in the tech is causing it to be real instead of a simulation that can end. Genesis dies, and Dalton has this kind of epiphany. This whole thing has just gone too far, which Azazel already recognized last year. And Dalton suddenly realizes Sephiroth really was more hurt by Shinra than anyone else, and that Shinra had hurt, and Sephiroth should have been their ally, not their enemy, and Dalton shouldn't have hated him so much. And he just completely changes, or starts on the road to changing when this happens. He just, it's such a shock to him to realize that he killed Genesis, whom he didn't want to kill. He liked Genesis, and he was even gone so far gone that he was even choking Azazel in his dream. He honestly thought it was a dream. He was mad at Azazel about the shield thing, but giving it back to Aerith, but he didn't actually want to hurt Azazel. He just thought that he was dreaming. And it was all some weird dream that he was taking out his frustrations in. And it was Genesis being stabbed that made him realize this is real. And so then I was gonna originally have the resolution just in the next chapter. And I thought, you know, why would I do that already? I could get some interesting mileage out of this, but I wasn't sure what to do exactly, because I kind of wanted, like, Genesis to stay dead for a while, and maybe they even put him in a tomb or something, and then later they start seeing him around. But I didn't think he would be torturing them at this point in the timeline. He wouldn't haunting them, disappearing when they find him. And my friend Azalea 542 suggested maybe he had amnesia and from the shock of dying. And I liked that idea, but in the end I decided to go with something else I'd been toying with, which was maybe he's a wandering spirit for a while. And so that's what happens. He goes around as a wandering spirit and is enjoying haunting Dalton. And I had a lot of fun with those scenes. Haunts him like 3 different times. And then he also has some creepier, more listless type scenes where he's talking to Sephiroth, and Reno says that he's haunting the company building. As Reno and Root are working as security for Seph and company. It's a long story. That would make a whole video in and of itself. But so Genesis is causing all this havoc, and they're wondering what's going on. And is he just restless because he doesn't want to be dead? Because you know that Genesis would not handle it well. He spent all of Crisis Core trying to not be dead, getting more and more desperate to save his life. So yeah, actually dying even at a point when he's trying to be good, I don't think he would handle death well at all. But that isn't the only reason why he's doing this. So if you haven't read the story, I'm going to keep a few surprises for you. So they have to unravel this mystery with Genesis and help him either move on or come back. Sephiroth wonders if he can come back because they seem to be trapped in dark magic because of that being put into the tech. And even though the simulations ended, the dark magic problem continues. Eventually, they do figure out what's going on, and then things do end up resolving in a happy way for everybody. And even with Dalton and company, they are kind of wanting to change by this point, all of them. Well, at least Dalton and Azazel. Gunju is still like, I haven't changed. And he still wants to kind of be mischievous at the very least. And he probably always will be, because I can't see him not wanting to cause a little trouble. But Dalton finally realizes everything's pointless and he needs to move on. So I don't know what their role will be going forward, because I don't want to go back on their character development. They've all ended up pretty close. They started as business associates, and Azazel blamed Dalton for Gunju's death. He felt Dalton drove him to be more wild than he even was. But Azazel also blamed himself, and I think that's part of why he was trying so hard to save Dalton. He didn't want somebody else he cared about to die, because he ended up seriously caring about Dalton through all the years that they've worked together. And Dalton acknowledges that Azazel and Gunju are his only friends. So they're kind of this weird little mismatched family. And I don't know what they're going to do going forward, if Dalton's going to like get interested in some other weird artifact or place. But I know I don't want them to be serving the same villainous roles as before. And with Genesis, meanwhile, things did end happy for him too. He's alive. And instead of having him go away, like I was figuring in the other video, he probably still would, but he'd keep communication open. Instead, after all the torture they've been going through, I decided, you know, Seth and Angiel, they're not going to want to see Genesis go away again. And Genesis himself, by this point, doesn't want to. He wants to be with them. And so it ends. They're going to try having Genesis live there with them, and we'll see how that works. If he ends up too picky and arrogant, you know how he is, and they can't get along. But I'm hoping that won't happen, because he is trying, and they're trying, and so I want it to work out. I'm gonna toy around with it a little bit. Maybe the next stories would be about them trying to figure out how to live with Genesis and how that's going to work long term. I don't know. But so there's lots of different things going on, lots of interesting things to come in the future. And I don't know, I just found it interesting that the story ended up being pretty significant for these OC characters as well as for the Genesis arc. And I'm happy that it worked out that way. And because I really enjoy developing characters, I don't like when they stay static. And when I came to care about these OCs, you know, I wanted their roles to develop also. And I wasn't actually planning for any of these things to happen. A lot of times things just kind of unfold naturally as you're writing, and you see new ways things could go. Like, I had not known for sure what was going to happen with Dalton in this story, if he'd go back into the coma, or if he'd come out of it but be so angry at Azazel it would split them up. And instead, this thing with Genesis happened, and Dalton had this complete change of heart. And I hadn't planned on that, but it just came out naturally in the writing, and it felt right. And so things just developed from there. Same as with, I hadn't planned that Genesis would stay with everybody at the end, but that comes out naturally in the writing too, because I just realized they're not going to want him to go. So I'm really happy with how things have turned out in the end in the story, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes of all of these characters in the future. And yeah, so it's been a really interesting time, like ever since I started on the path to these guys' arcs years and years ago. The Diamond Rose Glass was pretty significant on that path, and then Paradise Found last year, and now this story, which is called By the Grace of the Fire and the Flames. And it's just been really fun developing them and their relationships. And like Azazel was the first to really start changing, and it's been really interesting seeing how that happened. Like yesterday, I spent a long time going through all of these old stories and seeing how they behaved at first, and it wouldn't have been in character for these changes to have happened way back then during the Gaia stories. They certainly weren't ready to change or anything, but after everything they've been through since then, Azazel especially, he was ready, and it felt right for him to start changing. And then in this story, it felt right for even Dalton to start changing. So I'm really excited to see where this goes for them, and where it will go for Genesis too in the next stories. Planning probably maybe a little lighter, funny piece after the really heavy story I just finished, but I'm happy with how it turned out, and I think it ended in a really good way for everybody. So I'm really excited to see what happens next, and I hope that if you have been following the story, or if you want to, that you enjoy it, because I think it turned out pretty well, and I'm excited to see future developments with everyone. So I am Lucky Ladybug, and thanks for watching.